interpreting, interpretation, and how to be the best interpreter possible. Let's repeat again. Interpreter is a professional who facilitate the communication and understanding for people that speak different languages. Before we start with our interpretation roles, I'm gonna go ahead through a small vocabulary. LEP is limited English proficiency. This is the person that doesn't speak English. Interpreter is a professionalist who speaks languages that helps facilitating the communication. Source language is the language that we're interpreting from. If we're living in America, our source language will be English. Target language will be the language that we're interpreting versus or to. Okay, the first barrier is called linguistic barrier. Linguistic barrier is related to difficulty of communication of a people that speak different languages, or one of them does not speak enough to communicate in a certain field. The main role of an interpreter is conduit. In the role of the conduit, the interpreter speak into the target language the meaning of the message, not word by word, the meaning to meaning message without adding, omitting, changing, or submitting anything. So the conduit role, we're gonna have entire class about that. This is just a starting warm-up class here. It's interpreting the meaning from the source to the target language. Guys, this is the main interpreter role. This is the main role that interpreter should take during his professional encounter. The second barrier is barrier of register. The barrier is register. It's when we have a complicated terms, let's say complicated terms or something very specific, a very highly in a specific field, chemical, biological, business, it could be medical. And so in order to make the lab understand you or the provider understand you, we don't know, in order to make the communication to be clear and understandable, we have to clarify. In the role of the clarifier, interpreter, maybe sometimes interpreter doesn't understand the meaning or need repetition or clarification. So interpreter will ask in a third form, Madam, Sir, interpreter is clarifying, interpreter speaking as a clarifier. Madam, Sir, interpreter need a clarification. Madam, Sir, interpreter need you to allow me to lower the register in order to convey the message in more clear and understandable way. So the interpreter have to ask permission of the provider, especially if you guys interpret in medical or legal. In a legal, you don't need to clarify as much, but in medical, guys, make sure you ask permission to clarify, and you ask for clarification if you need to receive one. The third barrier is cultural barrier. Okay, here the role of the interpreter is cultural broker. The cultural broker offer an explanation of a cultural framework, background, prejudgment, and so on. And again, interpreter does not just interrupt to explain, but ask permission. Interpreter speaking, interpreter, may I offer a cultural clarification? Interpreter like to clarify cultural background. So you always ask for permission. Okay, the fourth barrier is called systematic barrier. This is when a different healthcare systems, different legal system could take place. Um, and the role of the interpreter is advocacy. I provide interpretational services for different companies. Some of them absolutely forbid the interpreter to advocate. But if you read the national standards of and best practice of an interpreter, there is some exceptions where the interpreter is allowed to advocacy for the patient. For me, 5 years in medical interpretation, I advocate only one time, and that was to prevent fraud. But normally, an interpreter, this role, it's very, very risky and it's very delicate. And if you decide to step up the boundaries, you gotta make sure that you know exactly what you can offer, what you can do in order to be safe and not build yourself up problems as an interpreter. So, as an advocate, interpreters speak on the behalf of the lab. And only, I repeat, I allow myself only, and legally you are allowed and safe to do that only if there you want to prevent danger, something as a crime, discrimination, or violation of the basic human rights. You cannot advocacy for someone just because you think you know everything. It's a very delicate position to advocacy while an interpreter. The only time that I repeat, I advocacy for one of the labs that I interpret for, this was to prevent fraud. So I'm repeating again, make sure that when you interpret, you stay in the main role of conduit. Wonderful, guys. So we repeat the four interpretation, four cultural barriers, four communicational barriers, and then we have four interpreter roles. And now we're gonna talk what is incremental intervention. Incremental intervention, that's the way the interpreter move from one role to another and go back to the main role. Remember, guys, interpreter have to stay 99% in conduct role, transferring the meaning of the message from one language to another without omitting, adding anything, right? 99%. Clarifier if needed. Cultural broker, again, if it's really necessary and you decide that you have to do that, you can offer additional explanation. And advocacy, extremely rare, less than 1% of your work experience you would ever need to use this role. But if you have to, it's important to know the boundaries of the role. But a lot of interpreters, if they don't feel comfortable, you can always refuse the work. So the cultural, the incremental intervention, this is how we switch from one role into another, staying as much as possible on the background, because interpreter only lend their voices, not your opinion, not your knowledge, none of that. You lend your voice and you use your head to transform the meaning of a message from one language to another. So incremental intervention, it's the switching of the roles, remembering to always go back to the role of conduct. Why the word is used conduct? Because the interpreter main mission is to transport the message from one, the meaning of the message from one language to another, as a conduit transport water from one place to another. That's why, guys, that's the main interpreter role. That was for today from Mirror Interpretation Todorova. That was lection number 2. the main roles of an interpreter. Please stay tuned, press like. I hope this video was useful. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful day. Bye bye.